We're excited because Scott Gorman's with us today.
Yay!
Scott's the new community pastor in Uptown. Scott, you want to share just for a moment?
Oh,
What do
okay,
you
yeah,
need to know about you?
yeah. Well, yeah, I been uptown for about 4 or 5 years, kind of serving in a worship leading capacity. And is it
7. Oh man.
I think more than 4 or 5.
It's been a while. It's been a long time. and yeah, so I've actually when I moved here to Minnesota, the first church I was a part of was a church plant. There's a guy 3 houses down, and had 4 or 5 families, and so that's kind of the church I grew up in. So I've been around church plants a long time. Been in ministry for freaking ever, and mostly doing worship ministry, and I love it. I just really excited to be part of the Uptown team. That's where my wife and I had our first apartment, and we love the Uptown area, and just really excited to be serving here. So
That's a big theater guy.
yeah, I act and sing and do voiceover work. Anybody who would give me a check to open my big fat mouth.
If you're in Minnesota and a few years ago, you might look familiar because you were the face of the state fair.
Yeah. Just after the pandemic.
Yeah, that was fun.
That was fun. And then, did you grow up in Minnesota, or did you just transplant here?
Well,
because you moved all over a little bit.
Moved here when I was about 5 years old.
Okay.
From Rockford, Illinois, outside of Chicago. So
Okay.
Chicago.
But you just moved away when you were in ministry in West Virginia. Right?
Yeah. Did 4 years in West Virginia, Morgantown, West Virginia, home of West Virginia University, about an hour south of Pittsburgh, and served there as full-time worship pastor. Yeah, hour away.
In my head, West Virginia and Pittsburgh are not that close.
We were 6 minutes from the border. I drive 6 minutes north, and I'm out of West Virginia.
I really like Pittsburgh. I've never.
Yeah.
I haven't been to that part of West Virginia.
Yeah. Well, the Morgantown is 80,000 people during the school year, and 40,000 when school is out.
That's like Springfield, Missouri.
Yeah. It's a big university.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
Did you move to West Virginia with Valerie?
Yeah, with Valerie and all four girls, and they were already with us. So yeah.
When did you move? Okay, so when did you move to West Virginia? Like, how old were your kiddos?
Well, it was 2010. We were there from 2010 to 2014, so they were all kind of junior high, just starting in high school age. So.
Man, did they freak out?
A little bit. Yeah, I mean, they're used to the flat because they only know Minnesota. But yeah, we moved into the mountains, and that was different. There are, I believe, 7 lakes total in West Virginia.
Yeah.
2 of them are naturally occurring, and that made no sense to me until I realized that they're in the mountains and there's no place for lakes.
Is it West Virginia? Okay, I know this is a weird thing to bring up in podcast, but Dirty Dancing in the 80s was filmed. I think it was filmed in either Virginia or West Virginia. It was in the mountains over there, and their lake that they. I'm sorry, I apologize right away. But the lake that's like in the movie where they're dancing in the lake and he lifts her up and the flying scene. Do you know what I'm talking about?
It's been such a long time.
It's okay, but that lake goes away. Like if there's no rain, that lake will disappear and be gone. And so like we were there. I was there with some friends a few years ago, and the lake was gone. And then it came back a couple of years later because of rain. But it was really weird because lakes just disappear. Mm-hmm. So strange.
Lots of rivers, lots of streams, no lakes.
There are like 4 natural lakes in Kansas, so I get that.
Yeah.
I like the water. I don't understand those things.
Yeah. Well, California is bigger than all of those places combined, and there are very few lakes.
Yeah,
just a big ocean or something, large body of water. That's like all the lakes.
Yeah. Rachel,
Careful.
Last week we started Esther.
Yes. So last week we started Esther. I was writing notes because I was nervous. I have a lot of energy this morning. So
Rachel's recap.
We will. Rachel's recap. So last week we got rid of Vashti, who was the queen. And they had like a 6-month banquet.
What happened to her?
She gone.
I don't think she lived.
50 cubic
I
hole.
think that I don't know if she was. And I mean, they said they just got rid of her, but what does a queen do? Like, if you're the queen, and like the king had a 6-month
And you
banquet.
embarrassed.
Yes, 6-month banquet, and then they had a 7-month banquet, and he invited everybody. Like, this wasn't just the nobles. This was like from the least to the greatest. Everybody was at this 7-day banquet. At the end, he wanted to show off Vashti, which we don't really know what that means, but we have some ideas, and it's not PG. And Vashti refused, and it may not even be PG-13. It may be not a good situation. And Vashti refused, embarrassed the king, like you said. And this king has he may be a little insecure as a
big
king.
anger too.
He's got big anger and he's got an ego, and then somebody embarrassed him, and so he says, "You're done. You're done being queen," and kicks her out. So yeah, like if everybody knows, and he was like king from India to Ethiopia. So it's not like it was like 120 provinces or something.
Yeah,
So for it to be that large, for her to embarrass him, like where does she go? I don't think she lived. I don't know, but I don't think she lived. It wasn't a good situation for her. And so then he missed Vashti. He realized, oh, maybe I got the anger get the best of me. And so he decides to hold a beauty pageant and brings in all of these beautiful women from the area. And he takes care of them for a year. Like they have all these beauty regimens and all these things that they're doing to just be the most beautiful. And then they go see the king. And if he accepts them, then, they could possibly maybe become queen. And if not, they become a concubine, which is not great. I mean, I don't know. I don't think it's great. And so they live together, and it's weird. And so then Esther comes in. She's not the queen yet. She pleases everybody. Everybody loves Esther. It seems like wherever she went, she found favor. They were allowed to bring whatever they wanted to go see the king. And she got advice. Like she didn't just bring what she wanted. She got advice for what to bring. And she did what she was told. And she brought that in. And then the king thought she was great. And he found favor. And so then she became the queen. So Esther also, we didn't talk about this, is Jewish. She was told to hide her ancestry because the Jewish people have been in exile for about 100 years. And I feel like, even in the current world we live in, people that are in exile or are living in another place, like that's not necessarily the most comfortable situation people find themselves in. So she's hiding her identity. Her cousin, not uncle, Mordecai, raised her. Nobody knows who Mordecai is, and Esther becomes the queen, all this good stuff. I think they have another banquet because you got to celebrate the new queen. And Mordecai doesn't come in, but he's at the gate of the area, like they're surrounded by the gate. And he hears 2 guards plotting to kill the king, and he's able to stop the situation. It's true. And so then they write that Mordecai saved the king's life. And that's where we ended. And now we are introduced to Haman. And I don't think Haman is in chapters 1 and 2. Like I was just quickly looking at it, and I think this is the introduction of Haman. We don't really know.
Yeah.
We know that he's
one of the themes we've talked about a couple of times is that Xerxes is kind of a pushover.
Mm-hmm.
He's like the king, but he also is like a people pleaser. He
Yeah.
kind of just does whatever people around him, and so maybe that's. Does it say why they wanted to kill him?
No,
Or
it doesn't.
just a
It's just
plan to
that
kill
they
him?
wanted to kill the king.
Yeah,
They were
potentially.
plotting.
Yeah.
They became angry about something and plotted to kill the king.
So then we're in the second part, which is Esther 3 and 4 is where we're looking this week. And in this moment, Haman comes into the story. Haman is, as we'll see this week and next week, Haman is like this dude that is just very prideful. It's all about making sure people see him, that he is able to put out in front why he's so great, riches, power, all these things. This is what Haman is. And so Haman,
I also think in that pride, he's super insecure. Like, I think part of why he's prideful is because he's insecure, and he needs all these exterior people to tell him how great he is.
and so this very prideful person cozies up to this kind of pushover king. And he does that not because he likes the king, probably, but because he can get whatever he wants from him.
Yeah.
And so Haman comes in the story. Mordecai is at the gate, and Haman as he's going through, he's making everybody that comes in essentially kneel down to him.
Yep, because Haman was exalted to like he's above everybody.
Yeah.
He's like next in like it's the king and then it's Haman. So
Yeah, second in command.
second command. Even the officials had to bow to him. Everybody, he wants everyone to bow to Haman.
Yeah. So he's having all these people bow to him as if he's the king almost. And Mordecai, for whatever reason, I don't even know it says why, but
No, it
Mordecai
doesn't say why.
refuses to
Mhm.
bow down to him.
Yeah.
And Haman cannot let it go.
Nope, he is very upset. He wants revenge on Mordecai immediately. Is this where he's like he's mad at all of them, and not only does he want to kill Mordecai, he wants to kill Mordecai's people. So he wants to destroy all the Jews. Like Mordecai doesn't bow, and so instead of saying I'm mad at Mordecai, let's just kill all the Jews because they're all obviously the ones that are the problem.
And this story is written to a Jewish audience about why they are the way that they are.
Yep. Why they celebrate.
Yeah, and it's a theme that we see over and over biblically and even in modern history of the Jews being kind of blamed as the society's issues.
I know. Well, and I was thinking about what. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's good.
Okay, I was just thinking about like why if a group of people come in, why are people so fearful or afraid or angry or like? And it's like people are afraid that they're stealing their resources or they have different opinions than them or live differently than them. But even like sometimes I feel like in some of the stories,
these people. It's not like these people were immigrants. They were banished from their land to have to go to this other place. And so they were just trying to live their life. And that's similar to like the Exodus story. These people were brought in as slaves, and then all of a sudden, through them being slaves, the Pharaoh's like, well, you guys are getting a little too powerful. And it becomes this whole issue.
Yep.
And it's just over and over again, no matter in the worst circumstances that these people are put in, they seem to somehow challenge the authority of the day.
Yep, always. It's uncomfortable. But.
Yeah. And so that's what's happening. Haman doesn't like it, and Haman tries to go after Mordecai and all the Jews that are, I don't even know what province they're in when this is happening.
It's in Susa, I think, because that's where the palace is. So I'm assuming it's right in Susa. I know, I tried to look that up once, I can't remember. But where is Susa?
And then next week we get into probably the best moment.
It's Iran, maybe. Possibly.
The best moment in Esther's coming up next week.
Yeah. I don't know. I like this one. Because it's a really tough. So I think part of the reason it's important to see where we started in this story is because I feel, and maybe this is my current perspective of things, but I feel like Esther probably didn't have a lot of say in all the things that were happening to her, like becoming part of this beauty pageant. She was brought to the palace. Did she choose to be brought to the palace? Did Mordecai choose to bring her to the palace? Did someone see how beautiful she was and say, you should go to the palace? I don't feel like she had a lot of choice. And like she was in the palace, she was being pampered and all these things for a year. But I think it was also like to be in service to the king. And like there's still, while she was being pampered, she still has lost a lot of life, like a lot of just personal autonomy. Maybe that's the right word. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they didn't have autonomy anyways. But like, so now like she's put in this position of authority. Well, she sort of has authority because it's like she can talk to the king, but she could also be immediately killed by the king. I mean, we saw what happened to Vashti. Like if you don't please the king, you're pretty much done. So she can talk to the king, but now like her whole family, Mordecai and all these people are being threatened and they want to destroy the Jews, which she is a Jew. Nobody knows she's a Jew, but she's in the palace and has a relationship with the king. So she is in a position where she could potentially have some power to help the situation.
And so Mordecai
no power.
Hears about what Haman is trying to do, and he goes to Esther, and he essentially tells Esther. And this is where like if you like grew up in church, the Esther line that you hear over and over
the one
again.
You know.
Yeah. For such a time as this. And that's essentially what Mordecai says. It's like everything in your life, everything that's led up, maybe it's for such a time as this. Your position, your authority, your connection to the king, maybe it was given to you so that you would have the chance to save your people.
Yeah, which, right? Like that's heavy. But I think what's beautiful about the Old Testament, there are a lot of moments where I feel like people are well placed for, but maybe that's why they're in the story, is because it could be anybody that was placed. But like we talked a little bit last week about Moses and his story and how he was put in a basket and placed in a river and then found by Pharaoh's daughter and then raised in the palace. So he had that connection, but then he knew he was an Israelite and wanted to saw how his people were being cared for. And what I really love about that Moses story is he tries to save his people on his own. And when he does that, he kills a slave driver and then he has to like run away. But it was like in his heart to do that. Like he saw how people were being, and then later God calls him back and brings him back to do what was always in his heart to do, but do it the way God intended for him to do it. And I feel like, that Old Testament story, when we're talking about Exodus and these stories where it feels very like somebody is very well placed to do exactly what God's calling them to do. I don't know, what does that do for us today? Sometimes we talk about calling and things being really specific. Like, when you feel like people are so well placed in the Old Testament, does that do anything to our thoughts about what we're supposed to be doing?
I mean, I think it's really easy. My biggest pushback on how Esther's talked about, and I brought it up multiple times as we're writing this, is I think it's really easy to look like it's easy to seem like things are well placed when you're looking in retrospect.
Yeah, right.
It's easy to say, like, things in my life led here
Mm-hmm.
when I'm looking backwards, but that doesn't mean when I'm in it that I had any faith or belief that it was.
Right.
And I think part of that's just because that's how life works. Like,
yeah.
Like, I'm not even sure. I don't know. I think part of it is God's plan, but I also think God's plan is us to make decisions and do stuff. So
yeah, I really like what you just said, and if anybody else, just interrupt me because we did discuss how I talk a lot. So, but like that verse where it talks about God will work everything out for the good of those who love Him, and I think that's not just true for us, but I think that's true for a lot of people. Like I can look backwards and think, wow, I made a really big mistake, and feel like that could, in the moment, that felt really disastrous. And now go, oh, I see how that actually was helpful and how that directed my path and how that has helped lead me to where I'm at now. And I can see beautiful things out of things that really felt broken in the moment. But, anybody else? Just me?
Well, I talked about it last week, but it's the theme in my head, which is that every moment is that moment. And great. I mean, the hard part about noticing it in the moment is tough. It is hard to do, but living, walking towards Christ, like we talk about a lot in Corner, makes it that everything we do for such time as this. So it's even the little things.
It is, yeah.
So that's what I got.
Okay. It's good. I think it's really good.
I think that you talk about well placed. It's all well placed. We just don't see it until a different time.
I think too in this chapter 4, I can't remember where it is, but they talk about, when she hears this, when Mordecai says, maybe you're here for such a time as this, and then like before she even goes and follows up with what to do with the king, is it in this chapter where they talk about how she fasted for 3 days?
She has all the Jews in Susa.
Yes, everyone's fasting for 3 days. It's like in response to, somebody wanting to murder all the people and all these things. And I feel like this is like maybe easy to skip over. I don't know if easy is the right word, but like she was preparing herself for what's next. Like it wasn't like she was like, all right, you told me it's time for such a time as this, and now I'm just going to go and talk to the king and skip the necessary
And she's
steps.
going to do the good thing, do the right thing, even if it if the worst thing happens, like
Mhm.
she's literally says, and this is where we're ending, I think, with that the scripture passage is, when this is done, I'll go to the king, even though it's against the law, and if I perish, I perish.
Yep. She's willing to like selflessly give to herself, give of herself. But I think like in doing that, like she's willing to pay the ultimate cost, but she also does some preparation in order to do that, which I don't know what that even, maybe that doesn't, I mean, I think it means something. I don't know what it looks like, but it's like, how do we, when we feel called to some really big things, or I don't know if called is the right word, but like, I think sometimes in our community, there's things I go, oh man, there's some big needs here. And I can jump in and like not really think about the consequences, but I feel like she's having everybody pray and fast. She's acknowledging that it's illegal, recognizing there's some consequences of this. Like spiritually, how do we prepare to do something like this? Not that we're ever going to find ourselves in a position where we're giving up our lives,
I would
but what does
say
it look like?
holistically? How do we prepare?
Holistically, then.
Physically, spiritually,
Yeah.
just because praying and fasting, sure. But for those 3 days, she wasn't just sitting in a room and praying and fasting. Like she was prepping, she was getting her heart right, getting her brain right, getting probably, I don't know. There's physical things that have no stress.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of that moment of like how she says, I shouldn't do it, or I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm going to do it.
Mhm.
It's the same perspective of Daniel. He says, I have faith that God will deliver me, but even if he does not, which is like one of my favorite
Yeah.
lines in
Yeah.
the Bible. It's
Even
like,
if he doesn't.
Yeah.
my faith in God isn't correlated to me just getting through this.
Yeah,
Like, my faith is bigger than that.
that's really good.
Even if, and I feel like that's what Esther's
If
saying.
I perish,
Yes.
Even if I perish, at least I know I've done what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah,
That's
I like that.
that's quite a way to live life.
Mhm.
I think a lot of times we, in modern day, we talk about right place, right time, or wrong place, wrong time, and the tendency sometimes can be to, just kind of sit back and say, oh well, I wasn't in the right place at the right time. But Esther here is like, I better get off my keister and do something about it, and didn't just kind of wait for life to happen to her, but she said, this is an opportunity, and this is something I need to pursue, and what was the phrase? You make your own luck, and that's pretty. It's not a great comparison, but the idea is that that if you don't act, nothing's going to happen, and sometimes without that opportunity can come, and you don't act, and the opportunity passes, and it's gone. And so you don't just rely on outside factors to say, okay, outside factors have made you this an opportune time, but now I need to do my part. And rather than just kind of laying back and go, okay, it happened.
Yeah.
And Scott Waller would say, we are God's plan. Like, God's plan isn't just something that happens; it's something that we participate in. Which is stupid. Sometimes I think God's stupid.
Why did you partner with us?
We are God's plan. Okay. All right. Anyways.
Yeah. Some of the questions we're talking about this week is like, what feels fair and unfair, and like some of this feels really unfair. I'd say like it wasn't exactly up to her, but yet like how did she respond to it?
Yeah, I mean, you talked a lot about how she was probably, I mean, this is speculation, but she probably did have a lot of self-agency and didn't make any decisions.
Right.
And the one decision she gets to make in life is to potentially end it all.
Yeah. And her life ends, however this goes, are the Jews going to be okay or not? Like it's all on her shoulders, and none of it was up to her. Makes me think of Mary, like, Mary, did you know? Like none of it was really up to her.
Dare you.
It's
Christmas
almost
music
Christmas
before
time.
Thanksgiving.
It's
Thanksgiving
almost.
is a
Oh,
holiday
oh,
too.
okay, we were also talking about that on Sunday, I think. I apologize. Okay. I didn't
December
mean
1st is when you can sing Christmas.
Okay, December
I'll give
1st,
you
I'll put
Black
it on my
Friday,
calendar.
but
Ooh, okay.
I
All right. No, okay.
But Greg will not.
Great.
After Halloween, all you can play is Thanksgiving music.
Yeah.
Is there
Oh,
Thanksgiving
wait.
music? There is
100%.
none. Okay. Just thankfulness all month. That wouldn't be bad, I guess. But and then we talk a little bit about like what are the costs of living in relationship with Jesus and the value of living in relationship with Jesus. And then even like just with Esther, what happens internally to sacrifice, to selflessly sacrifice for others, which is kind of the big question at the end. How do you sacrifice? How do you choose to do this or something like this? Like what made Esther go, okay? Like,
Well, often, another thing that we bring up all the time is the Bible is usually written in extremes to make a point.
mm-hmm.
And so you can
Yeah.
be like, well, I'm never going to have to like potentially sacrifice myself to save people like Esther.
Right.
But I think on a much smaller scale, for such a time as this is not always the big moments in life.
Mhm.
It is the small moments.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
Yeah.
it's moments where
Yeah.
you see a need that you can walk in and help
Mm-hmm.
for such a time as that.
And I think sometimes, like you were saying, like we mess it up. Like I think there's moments with our neighbors where, like, one of my neighbors a few years ago was really sick, and a lot of our neighbors really loved her well, and I didn't see her as much as I wish I would have, and kind of feel like, man, that was an opportunity I missed. But I also feel like other neighbors really cared for her, and then like just our neighbors, like how do we, if we're placed where we are in the communities we're in, how do we love our neighbors well when we know life is hard? How do we love our neighbors well? And like even like for kids, like just me having kids, there's just moments where you have to give up what you want to do for what the kids want to do, which is fun sometimes and sometimes really hard. And I don't know. I think there's a lot of moments all day that we can choose to sacrifice for other people, not necessarily as big as Esther, but
Wrap us up, Rich. For such a time as
Rich
this.
is wrap up. I can sing that
kind
part,
of
right?
did it, but
We did
I just think the focus on the good works, the focus on the being like Christ brings us to the times, the
Mhm.
little times, the big times. And Esther prepped for stuff, like prepared for 3 days to go and do this thing. And sometimes there are things that we know are going to happen that we have to prepare for. But a lot of times there are things that we're in the right place to just encourage or
Mhm.
speak into or whatever that may be. And I think that if we live as every moment is for such a time as this, then that's a good direction to be.
I like it.
We'll see you next week.
If I perish, I perish.
Perish. Love it.